Hi, this is Wayne Chapin from Cerulean. This video is going to be about how to manage company computers and personal mobile devices in Microsoft 365 using Microsoft Intune and Azure Active Directory Premium. And if you implement these things, you're on your way to not needing domain controllers for Active Directory, group policy, VPNs, Windows Server Update Service, or print services. And if that sounds good to you, let's continue. So for an employee at a company, a typical work device scenario works like this. You get a company-owned Windows computer for desktop work, and the employee brings their own iOS or Android device to access company email. And where people are working these days, the company office, but less and less, home offices, the client's office, a hotel inside the United States. Maybe you have people that work outside of the United States for the company. And the goals for IT management would be to keep the computers running smoothly, which means keeping them secure and up to date, keeping the company data secured and under the company's control, and then keeping employees productive. Also allowing them the flexibility to work on devices that are most comfortable with, and giving them the flexibility to work from home, which is good for families. So in the Microsoft 365 Enterprise device management world, it's really, we've boiled it down to these 5 things. Now, if I were to go into the Microsoft Intune portal right now, it would be very overwhelming. There's a lot going on there. It's these things that really matter. When we get to compliance policies and conditional access policies, that's ultimately, I'm going to show you a checkbox that is the holy grail of your focus on getting these devices under control. So the first thing we're going to talk about is configuring a software update policy for Windows, or a Windows 10 update ring. Then we're going to talk about a device configuration profile. So how you want your computer configured, how you want the Windows settings configured. There's a bunch of different things that we can configure there. We used to use imaging systems. We don't need that anymore. We can use configuration profiles. And then there's going to be software that we need to deploy on those devices, and we're going to configure an app deployment policy. And then once we've got these 3 things configured, then we're going to configure a compliance policy. And the compliance policy is super important, because what we're going to say is we're going to evaluate this Windows 10 computer that you're attempting to use to connect into our system. And if it doesn't meet our compliance policy, we will not allow you to sign in from that computer. And that is going to be enforced with an Azure Active Directory conditional access policy. So these 2 things are going to work hand in hand. We're going to use these first 3 items, the Windows 10 update ring, the device configuration profile, and the app deployment policies, to get to configuring a compliant computer. Then we're going to configure and build a compliance policy to evaluate if that computer is indeed compliant and secure, allowing it to access our system. And then we're going to enforce that compliance with the conditional access policy when that user tries to sign in from that device with a very special checkbox inside of Azure Active Directory Conditional Access Policy Manager. Then I'm going to show you how simple it is to enroll a company or personal device in Microsoft Intune. We don't have to install software on the device anymore. There's a connection we can make directly inside of Windows 10 for that to work. And then I'm going to show you the difference between an enrollment and a registration. And then I'm going to finish up with app protection policies. And this is how we give people access to company systems and allow them to synchronize company data on their personal mobile devices without having to manage or install any software on that employee's personal device. Yet, if that employee were to leave the company, if we disable their account, access to the company's data is removed from that personal device. And we can also restrict if employees are allowed to move data from our apps onto personal apps or local storage. So let's go ahead, and we're going to get started by logging into the Intune portal. So here I am. I'm going to log into portal.azure.com. And I'm going to go first into Intune. Now what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to configure is a software update policy. So I'm not going to go through step by step, setting by setting. Again, this is an orientation around how this works and how to get you going. If you want to learn more, you can do some training, or you can talk to us if you'd like to discuss it a little bit further. But anyway, we're going to configure a Windows 10 update ring. I've created one already. It's called our current branch, but you can just click right here and you can go ahead and, if I want to call this one demo, and I can go ahead and configure the settings of this. But here, this is where I'm going to say for Windows 10, I can put this group on a semi-annual targeted or semi-annual channel. It's important to know the difference between the semi-annual channel and the semi-annual targeted is targeted will get their updates 4 months before the semi-annual channel. But here we can choose if we want to update the drivers, if we want to have a patch deferral for up to 30 days, if we want to have a feature deferral for up to 1 year. and we can set the times and if we want to allow restart checks, things like that. I think you get the idea, but this is how we make sure that the computers are configured for their updates. So this is step one. Now let's go back into Intune. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually configure the devices with a device configuration profile. So if I go into here, you'll see I've got several of them, and not all of them are deployed right now. Some of them I'm just kind of working with and playing around with. But we've got one for encryption, we've got one for passwords and antivirus, we've got one for Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So let me show you something real quick, how extensive these policies are. Let me go into Demo. I go into Windows 10. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop down. Now here's this huge list that we can set. The most extensive one is device restrictions, and if I click on that, you'll see this is where we can set whether we're going to allow personal cloud storage, if we want to set up a printer through a URL, if we want to set the control panel settings, display settings. If I can go on down to Windows Defender Antivirus, you can see this is where I can control a lot of things on the computer. If I want to change this, I can also go down to endpoint protection if I want to get really refined with things like Windows encryption, or if I want to get really granular with Windows Defender Firewall. The one where you're going to spend most of your time is the device restrictions profile type. So again, if I go in here, and I'll take you to one of the settings we have. If I go to properties and I go to settings, I'm going to go to Windows Defender Antivirus. You can see this is where I'm going to configure the Windows Defender settings on the computer. There's going to be real-time monitoring, behavior monitoring, network file inspection, scan all downloads, how often we're checking for updates. You get the idea. And another important one would be the password settings. So here we're going to require a password, it's alphanumeric, the minimum password length. Again, you see what's going on here, but this is how we're going to configure those computers when they're on our network. We used to use imaging systems like Ghost or Acronis in order to get these computers set up. Now what we're able to do is just go ahead and push on a configuration profile how we want it. And again, we can set up whether we want encryption, password and antivirus settings, and there's some other settings that I haven't turned on yet, just I haven't got around to it. Set up the office Wi-Fi, some network printers, email configuration. Again, you can see where this is going. So going back into Intune, we set up the software updates, we set up the device configuration profiles. The next thing we want to do is deploy the software that we need to run on those computers. So that's where we go into Client Apps, and we click on Apps, and then from here we would set the software we need. Now it's really the ones that matter to us are the Microsoft Office 365 Pro Plus Suite and the Microsoft Azure Information Protection Client. So if I go ahead and click in here, and I go into Properties, and I go here and I can see, okay, I'm going to select these particular parts of the Office suite to be installed. And I also think it's worth noting this is where I can select the update channel. I always want the latest version installed on that computer. So any of the software that we want installed, we would put that here. And it's also important to know that we need an MSI file. The ability to install a Win32 app is currently in preview. Now, I'm going to go back to Intune. I want to refresh where we're at. We set up a Windows 10 update ring to configure our Windows 10 computer to stay up to date. We set up a device configuration profile for all the little settings and toggles and switches that we want set up on that individual computer. Then we set up an app deployment policy for the software that we need installed on that computer. Now we're going to come to the compliance policy. So now I'm in Intune and I'm going to go to device compliance, and I'm going to go to the monitor, the device compliance monitor, and you'll see right here. Now we got these computers inside the company. Oh, good. Green check, green check, green check, green check, green check, green check. Oh, what? There's my computer. I'm non-compliant. And I was actually working on some settings, and then they took my computer out of compliance. But for this video, instead of resetting it, I just said I'm going to leave it because I want you to see what a non-compliant notice looks like in the system. So I'm the kind of person that I take a lot of pride in seeing lots of green down this system, and it's very satisfying when you build out a software update policy, a configuration profile, an app deployment policy, and then you set a compliance policy, and then you see all of your computers are meeting the compliance policy. Or if you have one that went non-compliant, then you can actually see that as well. Now, I'm going to go up here and let's go into Windows policy. I'm going to go into properties. I'm going to go into settings. And this is where we get into the Windows computer connecting to your system if somebody is signing in. And regardless, whether that person has a valid password, whether they pass two-factor authentication, this system is saying, I'm going to evaluate their computer that you're trying to use to connect into our system to make sure it's compliant. So we have policies here that we're going to require that computer to have BitLocker installed. So if it's lost or stolen, the data that's on that computer is not available to whoever took the computer. So that's required. And if I go into device properties, I set a minimum OS version. I like setting it for one behind the current build of Windows. So this would be the spring build of Windows. You have to have that version running on your computer in order to be able to connect in. And then system settings down here, of course, we require the encryption and we require Windows Defender, and it has to be the latest version of Windows Defender, and we have to have real-time protection. We have to have the firewall installed. And then the actions for non-compliance is that computer will be marked as non-compliant, and that user then will get an email alert. And in our system, a ticket is also generated in our ticketing system to be reviewed as to why that computer is out of compliance, and then we figure out how to get it into compliance. It's worth noting that that user will get a notice telling them why they're not compliant, and hopefully they can remediate it. Sometimes they can, sometimes they cannot. Now I want to show you what the setting that made my computer non-compliant. It's just some of the things you got to deal with sometimes. You'll see here, I'm the only person applied to a new Windows password compliance policy. Now sometimes I don't know how the policies are going to behave or if they're going to conflict with a configuration profile. Sometimes that happens and you got to work with these a little bit. But if I go in here and I see the status, it's going to say, oh, there's a conflict. If I click on that, and I click on the password. So it's letting me know that the password type is currently conflicting with two profiles. So I have been working with a configuration profile for passwords to make it a little more granular and a little more refined. And now I'm seeing that that one's conflicting. But I wanted you to see what that looks like when that happens. So as an IT professional or a business owner playing the role of IT professional, these are the things you deal with. You want to increasingly make the settings more secure so that the systems can't be messed around with too much, but people can get their work done. But sometimes when you adjust those settings, you will have policies or conflicts, and you got to figure out why those are and get them adjusted. So now I'm going to go back to device compliance. So we've got all these computers that are compliant. That's fantastic. What I'm going to do now is show you what you're ultimately trying to get to when you're properly managing your computers inside of a Microsoft 365 system or any system as an IT manager in general. So let's review again. We got Windows 10 update rings to keep our Windows computer up to date. We've got a device configuration profile in Intune that is how we want a computer configured when it's running on our network, and it's going to be digitally applied, nice and consistent every time. And if we want to make any changes, those changes will get pushed out to all of our managed computers. We have an app deployment policy for things like Microsoft Office and Azure Information Protection Client, or any third-party applications that you're working with that can be pushed out with an MSI file. And then we have compliance policies, which let us know if we have a healthy computer or a non-healthy computer and a user trying to sign in from a computer that's either healthy or not healthy. Now we're going to tie this all together with a conditional access policy. The conditional access policies, I'm in Intune and I can access it right here in conditional access. These policies are really part of Azure Active Directory. That's where these policies get enforced. So if I go into Azure Active Directory here and I can go down to conditional access, there are my policies. I just want to show you that they really are part of Azure Active Directory and not Microsoft Intune. But just to keep it all together here, I'm going to stay in Intune and I'm going to go to conditional access, and here's my policies. Now what you're trying to do is this. You're trying to build a policy, and I've got several of them here, but this is not going to be a heavy duty video about Azure Active Directory and conditional access policies. It's a very important, powerful feature of Azure Active Directory Premium, but what I'm going to show you what you're ultimately trying to do. So we've got one for Windows 10 access. If somebody's trying to connect in to our systems and they're on a Windows 10 computer, they're going to be funneled through this conditional access policy. They have to go through this and they have to meet the requirements. And one of them is this right here: required device to be marked as compliant. So I will grant access, among some other things here. I will grant access, but I'm going to require multi-factor authentication. I'm going to require the device to be marked as compliant. Compliance is only evaluated on Intune enrolled computers, managed computers. That can be company computers, it can be personal computers, either way, but it can only be evaluated on an Intune enrolled computer. So in order to be evaluated as compliant or not compliant, it has to be enrolled. And once it gets enrolled, it gets the software update ring policy, it gets the configuration policy, it gets the app deployment policies. Again, it can be a company computer or it can be a personal computer, but most people are getting computers supplied to them by their company. And this is what you're trying to get to, that you can go back and have all of your computers show up as compliant for your security policies and your configuration policies, and you can check that box to say you can only get in if you have a compliant computer. Now, I'll tell you firsthand, that is way easier said than done. If you go in and enroll all of your computers and you set up a compliance policy, you're going to go in here and you're going to be amazed what a mess it is. You're going to be amazed how scattered, how so many computers are not updated. And then if you actually set a block saying they had to have a compliant computer, how many people, high-level people in your company, all of a sudden tell you they can't get into the system? You will be shocked. Oh, what operating system are you running? I'm running Windows 7. Oh, what version of Office are you running? Well, I'm running Office 2010. That's the reality of it. So this little button right here, this little checkbox, I would be very careful. You got to make sure everything's showing up compliant in the compliance policies and that it has been stable for about a week. You've got all the settings that you want in place. You got all the computers showing up compliant, and it is stable, showing compliant for about a week. Then you can click this. Now the thing is, if you don't have this checked, people can connect in with whatever they want. And that's not good. That's not good for you. Not only is it not secure, you're going to be dealing with a lot of legacy equipment that's not running very well. So you want to have this set that if you're connecting into a Windows 10 computer, it's got to meet my requirements. And especially if you're the kind of person that when you want to connect in and see device compliance, you want to be able to see all this screen because you know you'd put in a lot of hard work to make that happen. So we're going to review again. When we're doing Microsoft 365 Enterprise Device Management, we're using Microsoft Intune, Azure Active Directory Premium. Azure Active Directory Free and Azure Active Directory Basic are not going to work because you will not have conditional access with those. You have to have Azure Active Directory Premium. So you'll get that in Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 or E5. You'll get that in EMS or Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, E3 or E5. And you can get Microsoft Intune or Azure Active Directory Premium a la carte if you want. The best way to do it though is to get Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 or E5. So remember, we built a Windows 10 update ring, we built a device configuration profile, we built an app deployment policy, and then we set up a compliance policy to verify this computer is healthy or not and secure. And then we set up a conditional access policy to say you can only connect in from Windows computers if they're compliant with our policies, and they have to have multi-factor authentication. So I'm going to wrap this up and I'm going to show you real quick how easy it is to enroll a computer into Microsoft Intune, and I'm going to show you the difference between enrollment and registration and how that pertains to app protection policies, which are how we allow people to connect in with their personal mobile devices without putting any management software on their personal devices. The only thing we're going to be managing is our company apps that they choose to download on their personal device, and we're only going to be working with our company data. We're not going to do anything with their data. So here I am. I'm in my computer. I'm going to go to where I would enroll the device in Microsoft Intune. Again, we don't install Intune software on computers anymore. There's a way to just digitally connect that computer right into Intune, kind of the way we used to do things with domain joining computers to local domain controllers. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to settings, and I'm going to go to accounts. I'm going to access work or school account, and that's it. I'm going to connect in, and it's going to ask me what email address I'm connecting in with. So if I type in my company email address, wayne.chapin@zerillion.com, then it's going to go and see, oh, okay, well, you have an Intune configuration with a bunch of policies. I'm going to go ahead and go grab that information and start configuring your computer and joining you to our system. And here, I've got it right here. Now I'm connected to Zerillion. Fantastic. And anybody can do this. You can do this with your company computer. You can do this with a personal computer. We have people that bring their own Windows computers, but they're enrolled in Intune, so these configuration and compliance policies apply to them as well. Then last, I'm going to show you an app protection policy, and this is going to allow me to show you what the difference between a Azure Active Directory joined or versus an Azure Active Directory registered device is. So the scenario is I've got my phone here, I'm an employee, I've got my personal mobile device, and so I'm going to go ahead and use this, and primarily I'm going to be using my mobile device to check company email. So I happen to use Teams and OneDrive quite a bit on my device as well. But how do we give people access, and how do we allow them to have company data on their personal device, but know that if that person leaves the company or that device gets stolen or lost, that we can disable that device or disable that account and all the company data gets removed from that device? Well, that is app protection policy. So going back to Intune, I'm going to go to Client Apps, and I'm going to go to App Protection Policies. And you'll see we have a few here. We have one for Android, one for iOS, and Windows 10. I'm not going to get into the Windows 10 one That's going to be a separate video that's more involved, but I'm going to show you here for Android and iOS how we have this set up. So probably the most common one is going to be for iPhones, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to go ahead and click on properties, and you'll see some pretty quick. This is where we can say prevent iTunes cloud backup. Well, we wouldn't want that on company data. Allow app to transfer data to other apps. It's going to be policy managed app. So the idea here is we're not going to allow people to take company data and drop it on their local storage or drop it on their own personal Dropbox account. That is not allowed. Preventing save as, the device has to be encrypted. You see where this is going. So these are the requirements that we have in place. The device must meet these policy compliance in order to be able to connect in, and then we restrict what can be done with that data. And if I'm here, I move, that's the data protection policies. Here's the access requirements. They have to have a PIN, a locking out screen. If I go over to conditional launch, I have a minimum OS version, that there's an offline grace period, the device can't be jailbroken. Just see what's going on. So it's effectively a conditional access rule, allowing that person to connect into our data. That could be Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Teams, Skype for Business. But what that employee is doing is just downloading our app that we purchased a subscription for, and we're not installing anything on their device. Very, very handy feature. And then if that employee were to leave the company, the next time that they try to launch that app, it's going to go and check its license status, realize that person is no longer licensed, it's going to remove the data from their device. So the last thing I'm going to show you here now is Azure Active Directory joined versus Azure Active Directory registered. So if I go here into Active Directory, I'm going to go ahead and find my account, and I'm going to go ahead into devices, and you're going to see I have two devices here. So here's my HP computer, and you can see something that says Azure Active Directory joined. So that's where we went in here and we enrolled it into our work account. So that is managed. So again, it has the software update ring, it has the configuration policy, it has the app deployment policy, the compliance policies applied to it. But then you have another one here is Azure AD registered, and that is my Galaxy Note. And that one is actually not enrolled. There's no management software on here. I just have the apps installed on my computer. Outlook Mobile, Teams Mobile, OneDrive Mobile, Word Mobile. But when I first connected in with that app, it registered my device as a known device. So my device is known to Azure Active Directory, and that's a good thing. So anyway, that's the difference between Azure AD registered and Azure AD joined. So in most of the scenarios you're going to have in IT management under Microsoft 365 Enterprise, you're going to have all these company-owned devices, these company-owned Windows computers, and maybe some Macs that are Azure Active Directory joined, and then you're going to have all these mobile devices these users are using that are their personal devices, that they have apps, and they're Azure Active Directory registered, so they're known. And then each person is going to have 1, 2, 3 devices that are part of their Azure Active Directory account. So hopefully I've taken you through all this. Now you understand what we have to build in Microsoft Intune and Azure Active Directory, and then the enrollment of an Azure Active Directory joined versus an Azure Active Directory registered devices, and then how app protection policies allow us to allow people to connect in with their personal mobile devices but keep that company data secured and under its control. So now I'm going to give you some pro tips, and this is after 2 years of working with Microsoft Intune and Azure Active Directory. I'm going to boil this down to 6 tips. Get Microsoft 365 E5 if you can swing it. It's $61 per user per month, but is the best system that Microsoft makes. So all of those things that I showed you and more are going to be inside of Microsoft 365 Enterprise E5, because you will have Enterprise Mobility Suite E5 and Windows Enterprise E5 as part of this, and those are going to be the most secure pieces that you can put inside of your enterprise cloud system. Get some training or get professionals. Don't go into Microsoft Intune or Azure Active Directory Premium and think you're going to click your way through and a few Google searches and everything's going to work, and if it doesn't, you're going to go, well, it sucks. These are very sophisticated systems, and these allow you to have people all around the world accessing your system and have the data under your control and your system very secure, and you having the visibility around it. It's going to take time to understand how to do this if you want to do it yourself. So if you want to go do it, hopefully this gives you some orientation around where to get started, because I have never seen anything showing me a list of here's the things you really need to work with to get set up. There seems to be a lot going in Intune. A lot of it doesn't even pertain to you anyway. But then if you want to move forward with that, get some training. Or if you don't, get some professionals to help you do it and get you launched. Or if you don't even want to manage it, have the professionals manage it for you as well. Number 3 is real important. You got to understand, just because you change a policy or you change a configuration, it's not like all these computers will all of a sudden immediately report how the change went for them. It can take minutes, hours, it could take a day before the information comes back from all of your devices. So you have to be patient with that. You got to think about a scenario where you could literally deploy Microsoft Intune to thousands of devices. And how likely is it you're going to make one change and push that out to all of them, and within a few minutes they're all going to report back to you. It simply does not work like that with device management. Some will be online, some will be offline. Anyway, it takes time, and so you got to be patient. You start with a target group, make those changes to yourself, make it to a bigger group, see how those policies affect other policies that you have set up, and then go ahead and begin deploying that to bigger and bigger groups. So number 4 is unexpected policy behavior. So if you go ahead and make a change, for example, to an app deployment policy, and all of a sudden it's creating a bunch of failures, that'll be very frustrating. And then you have to go back and find out why that happened and reset your software deployment policy. So sometimes you'll make these changes and it will do things you weren't expecting, and then you'll have to figure it out. Another thing is that you can have conflicting policies. So I showed it earlier. I had a password policy that was in a configuration profile affect a compliance policy, and they didn't like that each of them were conflicting with each other. So sometimes you make those changes and then you see how it goes, and usually I apply it to my computer first to make sure we don't have any problems, and then if we do, we pull back and then we try it again. Ultimately, we're trying to give users everything they need to be able to do their work and keep their systems running nice and stable, and part of that is by keeping it secure and also restricting things that they can do to it that might otherwise make that computer go down in unexpected ways. And number 6 is be very careful with conditional access. It's a very powerful feature. As an IT pro, would it be nice to know that all the computers were up to date, had proper antivirus, were encrypted, were compliant with your company's policies, and people could not connect in unless these things were true. But the fact is, you will find out once you start turning this on, just the compliance without even the requirement of compliance, but just to see whether they're compliant or not, you'll have a lot of computers that will not pass, and you got to keep working to get those cleaned up. And I've had this happen before, where even in my system, where I find out I make a compliance change that seems pretty reasonable, people should have this particular thing running on their computer, and then I find out, somebody very important in my business doesn't. And so now I'm like, well, geez, they have a very old computer, or the software, the version of Microsoft Office they're running on is very old. So you got to be very careful with conditional access, but that is the most important thing you're trying to get to. Now I'm going to show it to you one more time. Where we're trying to get to is this. In conditional access, your policy says that computer must be marked as compliant in order to be able to get into your system. You're probably a long ways from being able to hit that checkbox, but that's where you want to get. It's very satisfying to know your system is very secure if that checkbox works. So I want to wrap up here talking about how do you manage a system like this, because if you don't do anything with it, it'll just get messier and messier and messier and more out of control. The nice thing about a Microsoft 365 system, there's certain things users can do to self-remediate problems, but some stuff you can't. So let's talk about how this process would work. On a weekly or monthly basis, you need to do a problem check. You need to go in and check for compliance problems. You need to go in and check for configuration profile problems. If you made a change to a configuration profile, are there computers that are having a problem taking those changes? You need to do an app deployment problem check. The software that you're pushing out to these computers, are there computers that are not taking those software loads for some reason? You need to do a Windows Update ring check. You need to do an identity threat alert. You need to do a device threat alert and check your Microsoft Secure Score. That's a whole other video, but if you want stuff just boiled down to one number, how you're doing, and things you should do to be making those scores higher, the Microsoft Secure Score will give you that for your cloud services, for your identities, and your devices. And then biannually, you want to update the required Windows OS version that you're working with. Remember, there was a setting for conditional access that said you had to have at least this version of Windows on your computer. That needs to be reviewed every 6 months, and you need to update that manually, for now anyway. You need to look at the new capabilities in Intune. I remember the first time I saw Intune 3 or 4 years ago, it seemed fairly basic to me. I can't believe how advanced it's become, and they keep adding new features into it. And so whether you're setting up configuration profiles or app deployment profiles or policy compliance, you got to go in there and review those and see what new things are showing up. You can go ahead and add to your policies, and also review new capabilities inside of Azure Active Directory. That directory has your user accounts, it has your devices that your company is working with, and this is the thing that controls, it is the door to the security in your system. It's not that firewall. It is Azure Active Directory. And that is the thing that we have to keep looking at and see what new capabilities are inside the system so that we can make sure your system stays nice and secure and the users can get the work done that they need to do. So lastly, thanks for watching this video, and hope it gave you an idea and orientation around the power of Microsoft Intune and Azure Active Directory as part of the Microsoft 365 Enterprise system. It's incredible capabilities, and if you are an IT manager full-time, get some training or work with a company to help get you set up. And especially if you're the business owner of a company and you want to get your computer system cleaned up and all these different computers inventoried and running securely and smoothly, talk to a company about doing that. And if you want to talk to us, love to take your call. You can reach us at 847-995-9800, or you can reach us at support@Xerillion.com. You can talk with our sales team and we'll set the call up. Thanks a lot for watching.